So, welcome. We are here today to talk about daily ACT acceptance and commitment therapy practices that you can use for your daily life. And again, we're so happy that you're joining us today. Thank you for being here. Today, what we're going to do, we're just start with a quick overview of the next 2 hours. We are going to start by setting the stage here for why ACT daily, what is acceptance and commitment therapy and psychological flexibility, and why is this useful? And then we're going to walk you through each of the 6 ACT core processes, which are being present, acceptance, cognitive diffusion, perspective taking, values, and committed action. And everyone always wants to know, John already mentioned this, but can we get the slides? And so what we're going to do is the web page that you see there, you can go to that at the end of our presentation today. And we have a subset of the key slides with the main points from today, and you'll be able to download those at the end of the presentation today. What you're going to need today, in addition to just, being here, joining us and bringing in, your mind and your attention, we're also going to ask you to have handy either a journal or just a piece of paper you can write on and a pen, or, you can toggle over to a place to type on your computer, because we are going to do a couple of writing exercises today. And we think that writing is important. It's a really helpful way to really put these ideas into practice because it makes it more personal. So that this isn't just so abstract, but rather applied to your own life and your situation. Writing is also a great way to practice some of the skills and ideas that we're going to talk about today. And writing can also be a great tool for perspective taking. There's something about the process of writing that can really help you take perspective. So who are we? I am Debbie Sorensen, and Diana Hill is here as well. We are both psychologists, and as John mentioned, we are co-hosts of the podcast Psychologists Off the Clock. We're good friends. We've known each other for years. And we're also co-authors of the book John mentioned, which is ACT Daily Journal, Get Unstuck and Live Fully with Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, which is coming out this week. We're very excited. We're both clinical psychologists who are informed by our knowledge of psychological science and also by our own lives. And one of the things we talk about in the book and the podcast is how we apply these to our own lives. We are moms, daughters, sisters, friends. And so we put these concepts into action in our own lives every single day. And so we're so happy to be here to share them with you.
Yes, we're happy to share them with you, and we're also here for a reason. There's values underlying this work, I think, for both of us, and things that we care about that bring us here. And we know that people are coming from all over, taking out 2 hours of their day to join us at this workshop. And we thought it would be nice to just begin by starting with taking a look around at who's here. And looking through, maybe taking a moment to just scroll through the people that are here, that they're all here for a reason, and you're here for a reason too. Maybe there's something that's important to you in your life, whether you're a therapist and you want to learn more about how to bring this to the therapy room, these skills, or maybe there's something important to you personally that brought you here that made you want to learn about psychological flexibility. So if you want to take a moment to just look around at the screen, scroll through, see the people that are here. And then John, if you could open the chat, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you coming from? And what brought you here? What is it that you care about that brought you here? Maybe share with us a bit in the chat so we can get to know you, even though there's so many of us here. And Debbie, I'm curious for you, what is it that you care about that brought you here?
Well, we have many times, Diana and I have talked to each other about how we have really benefited from ACT in our own lives and in our clinical work. And one of my values is sharing these ideas with people who could benefit from them all over. And I think, to me, an opportunity like this is a chance to share some of what I've learned, and I hope it helps people. How about you, Diana?
Well, I first want to say I'm distracted by people coming in from Japan and Poland and all over, and then my hometown of Santa Barbara. So it's so good that we're coming together in this global way to learn about these skills that I think are really profound and powerful and that you can put into practice right now. And I'm here because first of all, I have a friend named Debbie that has been willing to do this, that we're doing this together, and it feels like a really values rich experience for me in terms of combining these ACT principles that I use in my practice, but like Debbie also use them in my daily life, and I'm committed to sharing them with people, and I hope that they're helpful to you. So, welcome. Oh, Jamaica and Turkey. This is so cool. It's wonderful to see all of you and hear about where you're coming from. So, hold on. I got all these people here. So, there's values that brought us here. And, when we wrote this book, I told this story at the beginning about my dad. He was a great storyteller when I was growing up. And one of the stories that he told me when I was a little girl was that when painters paint the Golden Gate Bridge, it takes them so long to paint it that by the end, they have to go back and start all over again. And I think sometimes life feels a little bit like that. It feels like we're painting the Golden Gate Bridge of our own lives. And sometimes that means we get stuck in the same spots. It feels like, wow, I've been here before and faced by the same problems over and over again. And sometimes it means that we get so clouded by our self stories that we can't see the view or take perspective on our lives. And our heads tend to give us a hard time, especially when we're painting important parts. Maybe our heads tell us that we're not cut out for the job, or judge us, or compare us, or criticize us. And then sometimes we don't even know what direction to head or why we're painting this bridge in the first place. And we also can get caught up in trying to get to some future point. Like there's some point other than now that's going to be when we are going to be happy or satisfied with our lives. And many of us have this "I'll be happy when" story, right? When things get back to normal, or when I have a life partner, I'm less anxious. And even if you think for yourself, what are some of the if, then, when stories that you may get caught in that keep you from living fully in your life as it is right now? So what Debbie and I kind of want to propose is, what if? What if about the possibility of you being able to start living a rich and meaningful life today? And the 6 core processes of ACT could help with that. So they help you with being present wherever you are on the bridge of your life, and stepping back from thoughts that are critical or direct you in directions that you don't want to be going. They help you with acceptance and opening up and allowing, even when difficult sensations and thoughts arise, and stepping back from time to time, turning around, taking in the view, taking perspective, knowing what parts matter most to you, and sticking with the process. So instead of trying to get to the end, paying attention to the process of where you are now, because the end of the bridge of your life is not necessarily where you want to, speed up or speed through. And ultimately, the question is, how do you want to paint the bridge of your life? It's personal and chosen by you.
So all of us, as you know by now, have ups and downs in our lives, every single one of us. No one is immune from life being hard sometimes. No one has this, smooth sailing existence where there's absolutely no bumps in the road. So all of us might at times experience, we will at times experience loss and death, potentially trauma and stress. As you've learned in the last year, we've faced a pandemic as well as a mental health aftermath of the pandemic. We've faced toxic racism and oppression. Many have experienced economic suffering, as well as the climate crisis that many of us are worried about. And these are just some of the examples of many things that can come our way that can be difficult and painful in life. And we quoted ourselves here as saying you're even more likely to experience discomfort when you engage in activities that matter to you. So if you think about the things in your life that have been really, truly important to you, often those very things also come along with them some pain and discomfort. And it's almost impossible to attach meaningful things from having some discomfort that shows up. And what really matters when life gets hard and we hit these ups and downs is how we respond to them. So one of the things that can be helpful in navigating life's ups and downs is psychological flexibility. And what that means is like all of the ACT processes together. And Stephen Hayes, who is one of the co-founders of ACT, calls psychological flexibility the ability to feel and think with openness, to attend voluntarily to your experience of the present moment, and to move your life in directions that are important to you. Or as Benji Schoendorf said on our podcast, it's about being able to do what matters to you, no matter what. And actually, there's been some really interesting research that just has come out recently during the pandemic about psychological flexibility and how people are coping with COVID. And what they've been finding, and there's several studies showing this so far, is that people who are higher on psychological flexibility have lower rates of depression, anxiety, and insomnia during the pandemic, reduced suicide risk. It mitigates the impact of social isolation. And it's also helpful with navigating some of that family stress and discord that some of you may know about from being cooped up with so much family togetherness time.
And today we're going to go through the 6 core processes that are involved in psychological flexibility. And when I was first learning these, I found it really overwhelming. So you may feel like being bombarded, if this is new to you, by a lot of different information. It's helpful to know that you can always get that information later. You'll get the slides. But really, it boils down to just 3 core things. That being psychologically flexible means willingness, courageous, and being open. So accepting, A for accept. And also knowing what you care about and orienting towards what's important to you. And then taking a step, making small moves in the direction of what you care about on a daily basis. So accept, care, and take a step. If you could just kind of stamp that one little slide in your memory and then experience the rest of the workshop, really take it on as not something to learn up in your head, but to feel in your body and in your heart. That's what our hope is for you today. So there's a lot of research on ACT, and Debbie highlighted some of the recent research, but researchers have been working in the area of psychological flexibility for many, many years, and we're very grateful to them for their blood, sweat, and tears around this. And what they found is that not only does ACT help in terms of your mental health, like anxiety and stress and insomnia, it's also really beneficial in terms of your relationships. So just the practice of something like perspective taking is going to help you out a lot when you're in a conflict with your partner, to have more empathy for them, right? And ACT is beneficial for helping you through tough times, resilience, as we're seeing with COVID, and the tough times to come. So I like to think about some of these psychological flexibility skills help you get grounded and rooted like a tree with deep roots. And then they also help you be able to move and adapt as times change, like a tree that can bend and flex with the winds of life, right? So it's about both. And what's interesting about ACT is that it's also getting applied in the realm of performance. And, ACT is being used for athletes, Olympic athletes, leaders, as well as can help you out when you're trying to make a behavior change and sustain it.
What is the 20% that does the 80%? What are the processes of change? The ways that you interact with the world outside and within that makes a profound difference as to whether or not your life is moving upward or downward. And we've settled into 6 processes that are all interrelated. They're like 6 sides of a box. They fit together, they support each other. And if you do those things and you make progress on those things, life starts opening up.
So that was Stephen Hayes, who's one of the co-founders of ACT, talking about these 6 processes working together. And hopefully it will help us with life start opening up, even as life starts opening up with the reopening. So the 6 processes that Stephen Hayes was referring to are being present, acceptance, cognitive diffusion, perspective taking, values, and committed action. And we're going to go through each of these today, one by one, talking about what they are, giving you an experiential exercise to try it on, and you hopefully by the end you get a little bit more of a sense of what these are and how they may also work together. Debbie's going to get us started with being present.
Okay, so I'm going to actually start with a personal story. That's that slide that Diana just showed for a second, and I'll show it again in a minute. That's Salt Lake City. And before I tell this story, I'm going to just say I've been accused in the past, mostly by my husband, of being a little bit like kind of stuck in my head sometimes. I get very easily kind of just lost in thought and preoccupied. Okay, so one day I flew out to Salt Lake City for a work trip, and I was going to go actually, in fact, lead an acceptance commitment therapy workshop out there. So I get to town, check into my hotel. There are a couple of restaurants a few blocks away, so I was going to go get some dinner. And I was walking down the sidewalk, and I was kind of like thinking about, okay, dinner, should I go for Thai food or Mexican food? And I was thinking about the workshop that I was starting the next day, like kind of mentally reviewing my notes. And I had walked, I'm not even kidding, about 2 blocks before my point of view kind of expanded. And I looked up, there was this gorgeous, enormous mountain range right in front of me. And I was so lost in my own stream of thought that I didn't even notice it. And bear with me for 1 second while I share my slides here. Okay, so there it is, Salt Lake City. So, and the thing is that this experience is something that happens probably to most of us, at least sometimes, just about every single day, right? So we all have things that are happening in our direct experience in the moment that we are just missing out on. And I want to just invite you, as I'm talking, to think about some of the areas in your life where you might not be fully engaged, where you might be preoccupied, where you might be a little bit checked out or kind of just caught in your own head and not paying attention. So the human mind is a glorious thing, right? As a species, humans have this amazing ability to think, plan, imagine, create meaning. I mean, our minds can do incredible things, but the truth is that there's a cost to that. There's a dark side. So we can also get lost in worry, in rumination about thinking about the future, thinking about the past, just doubting ourselves and getting self-conscious about our own selves. And we can get really caught in our mind like that. And when we do that, we lose out on the experience of just being engaged in the present moment. So when we are engaged in this process of being present, we're more fully experiencing our lives as they are happening now, no matter what, whether that moment is filled with joy or sorrow. This process is really about being more present in your experience as it's unfolding. And I want to share with you all a little exercise. When we talk about daily ACT practices, we're talking about things that you can do in your regular day-to-day life. And this is a practice, I call it pause, notice, choose. And this is something that I use throughout the day. You can use it in your life. It doesn't take a lot of extra time or effort. It's really just a shift. And what you do, I'm going to walk you through it, and then we're going to try it out together, is, and by the way, this is a really good one to use at a time. Maybe, for instance, if you're starting to feel a little irritated and you might normally just react to a situation automatically, or if you're starting to feel a little bit anxious about something, that would be a really good time. But you can really do this exercise anytime. And you can build it up like a muscle where the more you practice it, the more useful it becomes. So all you do is this: you pause, you notice that something is shifting. Maybe you're having a shift in your emotions or your sensations or your internal experience. And you just sense that shift and you create a little space. And before you react, you just take a step back and you breathe. So again, you don't have to leave the room or go sit somewhere for half an hour or anything like that. You just kind of create a little space between you and your experience, and you notice. So what's happening around me? What's happening in this situation? What do I notice in my body? What sensations am I feeling? What do I notice physically? What is my mind doing? What thoughts am I having? Is my mind getting really busy with this? Am I telling myself a particular story about it? And then you also notice what you're feeling, what emotions are coming up. And sometimes, not always, sometimes emotions are a little random, but sometimes our emotions can actually tell us something important. So you can ask yourself that question, are my emotions telling me something right now? And then pause, notice, choose. The third step is to think about your best self. How would my best self respond in this situation, in this moment? And can I choose how to respond like as closely as possible to my best self in this moment? You may not always get it exactly perfect, but can you do something that's in that general direction? And so I'm going to just take a moment. I'm going to invite you all. You don't need to close your eyes or anything like that. In fact, I'd encourage you not to, because what I want to show you is that you can do this exercise and nobody even needs to know about it. You don't need to close your eyes. You don't need a, meditation cushion or anything like that. So whatever you're doing right now, just pause. Just check in with yourself, create a little space here to just first of all, just take a look around you, notice the situation. You're probably sitting at a computer or some sort of device, but just take in the whole view. And then turn your attention to your body. What is your body feeling right in this moment? No judgment, just notice. If you're feeling anything, like I'm giving a talk right now, so I'm feeling a little fluttery up here. But just if you're noticing anything in your body, just notice where is it that you're feeling something. Notice your mind. Is your mind really active right now? Are you distracted? Are you focused? Is your mind calm, quiet? Again, no judgment, just notice. Notice how you're feeling emotionally, what's showing up for you in this moment. And if you're feeling anything in particular, is there anything that emotion is telling you? Maybe, maybe not, but sometimes there can be some information there. And then choose. So again, just even in this moment, as you're sitting here listening to this talk, what would your best self be doing right now? And just see if you can make contact with that person. We'll talk more about values here in a few minutes. And then just see if you can be that person as best as you can. And that's it. You can do it, like I said, anytime, just throughout the day. And especially if if it's one of those situations where you don't always act like your best self, like when you're feeling a little irritated or something like that, just try that out and see what you notice when you do that. And again, a lot of the skills that we're going to talk today, it's really true that the more you practice it, you get a little better at it over time. So another word for being present that you've probably heard quite a bit is mindfulness. And in our book, we talk about how formal mindfulness practices are really wonderful and helpful. And Diana and I have both benefited from practicing mindfulness more formally. But really, for the sake of your daily life, what matters more is being mindful in your life, in the things that really matter to you. Often we go through our lives doing our work, engaging in our relationships, a little bit on autopilot because, we do the same thing sometimes day after day. We might just be a little bit preoccupied or, kind of in a bit of a fog. And when we talk about being present, we're talking about being really more wholeheartedly engaged and even savoring those little daily moments that make up your life, moment after moment after moment. Time passes and you don't want to miss it all because you're so caught up in your thoughts or you're just, kind of going through the motions. And really, if you think about the various things that you care about in your day, chances are that it kind of boils down to two categories: work, and I mean work broadly defined. So it could be an actual job, but it could also be domestic tasks, caregiving, various things that you need to do to keep your life running. And then the other category is love, relationships, your relationship with yourself, with the people in your life. And for a lot of people, those are two areas where we can just think about and ask ourselves the question. And in fact, I would encourage you, we have a little writing prompt here. If you have your paper handy, is to just think about your own life just for a moment and think about some areas of your life that are important to you. Maybe a particular relationship or a particular task that you're doing regularly, where you would just like to show up more fully and wholeheartedly and be more present and engaged. And that brings us to our next process, which Diana is going to, hold on, let me stop my share here. Diana is going to take us to this process too, which is acceptance.
So acceptance is a good one to come after being present, because sometimes it's the act of not accepting or being uncomfortable that can lead us to pulling ourselves out of the present, because the present is painful. And when I think about something that was painful, like literally painful in my ear when I was many years ago when I had my youngest child, was that he came out screaming. And not only did he come out screaming, I was actually asked the nurse, is there something wrong with this kid? And she was like, no, he's fine. He's just crying. But he kept crying for the first 4 months of his life, pretty much the whole day, every day, and a lot of the night. And as a mother wanting to make him stop crying, I would do all sorts of things. I would strap him on my chest and walk for miles. I'd walk around the kitchen table. I would rock him. I would sing to him. I would play music loud. I'd play music soft. I would do everything possible to get this kid to stop. And really what I was trying to get is not only him to stop, but the feelings inside my body that were so aversive to hearing him cry. It was so painful. And I know that we all have that thing, right? We have, maybe it's not a baby, but it's our own anxiety that feels like a crying baby screaming in our ear. Or it's a relationship that feels so painful to us that just we can't, wakes us up in the middle of the night. But somewhere along the way, I remember just being incredibly exhausted and worn out and spent, as new parents are. And there was this moment in time when I looked at him and I was like, I've got to stop. I've got to stop making him stop crying. And so I stopped and I decided that instead I was just going to love him and I was just going to just do what I wanted to do, which was connect with him. But all my attempts to make him stop crying was leading me to not bond with this baby. Like 4 months in, and I don't feel bonded with this little guy. So I stopped trying to make him stop crying, and it didn't do anything about his crying. He just had to work his little nervous system out to whatever was going on there. But what it did do is change the way that I related to it all. And I think that that's what acceptance is about, right? So it's about not necessarily changing our experience or even approving or liking of what's happening, that we can accept things without approving of them. We can accept things without liking them. But instead, it's being able to open up and allow what our full experience is. So many of you may be therapists or you've gone to therapy, or at least if you're here, you're interested in mental health. And one of the most common things that happens when you're a therapist is people will come in, and I'm sure, Debbie, you could relate to this. They'll say, I want to stop thinking about this. I want to stop feeling this. I hope you can help me with that. And I want to stop remembering this. And so as an ACT therapist, this is how I respond. I can't help you with that. I'm sorry, I'm not that kind of therapist. But what I can do is help you with letting go of fixing, because oftentimes it's our attempts to fix things that are preventing us from living the full life that we want to lead. And we see that with something like chronic pain, right? So Steve Hayes just sent out we're on part of a listserv. If you're interested in ACBS, they have listservs. And he sent out this message about how ACT is now considered one of the primary treatments in the UK for chronic pain. It's not going to solve necessarily your pain problem, but it may help you have better functioning in your life, right? If you let go of trying to fix the pain. Making room for feelings. Feelings are part of our human experience, and there's a whole lot of feelings that we may not like, but actually making room for them and allowing them to be there can help us in that tug of war that we have with ourselves and free our hands up a little bit so that we can use them for things that matter to us. And finding the values behind our pain. So in that moment, like my baby crying, the reason why it was so painful to me is because I really cared about him and bonding with him and wanting to mother him, right? There was deep values underneath that. That's why it was painful to me. Kirk Strassel and colleagues have written about sort of the stuff that we tend to not accept is stuff that shows up under our skin. And in ACT, that's what we're really interested in, is opening up and allowing all the stuff that shows up inside of our human bodies. And those are things like difficult thoughts, difficult emotions, difficult action urges. So that's like cravings, memories, and sensations. And so I want to do a little bit of an exercise with all of you about maybe thinking about in your own life right now, today, this week, what it would, if you could not think about or feel or remember something that's painful for you, what would it be? And I want you to take out a piece of paper and just write on, kind of make it a separate piece of paper, and write on one side, if I could not think about or feel or remember X, Y, or Z. Just write it on one side. Just take a minute, half a minute to write it down. There should be something dominant there, easy to pull up. Could even just be my back pain, right? And then once you have it written down, kind of think for yourself, what have you tried in your life when difficult stuff has showed up to not think or feel something? And we've all tried different things. Some things are our favorites, and I'm going to give you a list of some of these things. So just take note which of these lists are the ones that are your go-tos in terms of what you tend to try when you don't want to feel or think about something. So, I'm going to move this out of the way. So for some of us, we numb out. We numb out with food or substances or by other types of addictions. That's a pretty common one that we see. And then there's some other ones that are not so obvious. So something like bracing our bodies. Do you tend to clench your teeth or hold your breath? I even notice in my own body right now that I'm like really tight. I'm kind of not breathing deeply because this is something that's uncomfortable, talking in this way. Even on the outside, it looks like I may be comfortable. On the inside, it's not very comfortable at all. So I tend to tense up my shoulders. Do you distract yourself when difficult feelings come up? And we all have that daily distraction now, right? Of our phones right there. And maybe we're just bored in a moment. We're bored in a conversation, so we'll check our phone. But it's that subtle, discomfort of living that we can tend to distract ourselves from. Or maybe you give up. Maybe you just don't go, or you isolate, or you cancel, or you hide. And that's become even more the case as during this time when we've been inside more. Right now, it's like, ooh, it's uncomfortable to go out and meet people again or be in these new environments. And so we may just choose not to go. And maybe it's not based on our values that we're choosing that, but based on emotional avoidance. My personal favorite is rushing through things. You'll notice that when I get anxious, I talk really fast, but also sometimes our attempts at achieving more or striving are actually really about emotionally avoiding our lives. And then overthinking is a really common one. We've all been the experience of sharing with somebody something that's uncomfortable for us and they go straight to problem solving, right? And even as therapists, we can go to problem solving in the moments that are most difficult for us. So Debbie and I call this the emotional avoidance roundabout, which is basically when you turn away from pain and it also turns you away from your values, you're engaging in emotional avoidance. And in the short term, humans are designed to do this, right? We're designed to turn away from pain because our ancestors were successful at running away from painful things. That's how they lived, to be able to have children, right? But when it comes to things that are underneath your skin, and when turning away from your pain also turns you away from your values, in the long term, it can lead you in directions that you don't want to be going in your life. So I want you to pull out that paper again. And on the other side of the paper, I want you to write down maybe what are some of the values that are associated with this being so painful for you. So, for example, for me with a crying baby, if it was someone else's baby, that sound would not bother me. I mean, it would kind of bother me, but it wouldn't be like gut wrenching pain, right? And so some of the values for me around that is really loving this child, right? So maybe if you have social anxiety, there could be something that you care about there. You care about belonging or being part of, right? So right on the other side of the paper, what is it that you care about? What are the values that are underneath this that's making it so painful for you? And so here you have this paper, right? And there's a lot of things that we kind of go through those emotional avoidance strategies that we just did. There's some things you could do with it, right? So here's the painful thing. I could roll it up and I could smoke it, and that would get rid of it. Or I could tear it up, and that might be a way to get rid of it. Or I could scrunch it up into a ball and hide it under my bed, and that would be a way to try and get rid of it. But what we find is that it keeps coming back. Maybe it wakes you up in the night. Or maybe the other option is that I just tore up something that has both my pain and my values associated with it. So acceptance is a strategy that allows you to, instead of try and get rid of those painful things that are inevitable in life, relate to them differently. So relating to them differently may be something like taking this piece of paper, and you could do it with me here, and you could like hold it, gently contact it, and just sort of allow, okay, this is this thing that's hard for me. Allow it to be here. Or maybe it's also getting curious about it, exploring, like, what are the values underneath this for me? Why is it so painful? And also getting curious with the sensations that show up in our bodies. And we're going to do a experiential practice so you can get a sense of that. Saying yes to what is, and that's actually Dan Siegel's yes brain that I really like. We do these sometimes we do little exercises in our household where we practice a series of questions and you have to say no to every question, and then the same series of questions and you say yes to every question, and you just notice how it feels in your body. So you could even say no in your brain to everything that I'm about to say. Do you want to get some lunch later? How do you feel about, maybe us meeting up for coffee? Do you want to try to listen to some new music? Right? And now say yes to everything that I'm about to say. Do you want to get some lunch later? Do you want to go get some coffee together? Do you want to try this, listening to this new music? And you can tell the difference when you say yes in your brain versus when you say no. How it even just changes your body, how it feels in your body to have a yes brain. So we can say yes to what is, and then we can take action towards values, even when it's uncomfortable. So we're going to practice a little bit with acceptance, and just in also the service of taking care of our bodies. You can also take a different position. You can close your eyes. You could look at something else while we're doing this exercise, just so that you can get a little bit of a break with your eyes and your bodies here. And I'll do another little more of a movement break a little bit later on. But I want you to find a place where you could, if you're multitasking, maybe take a little, minute or two to do this exercise, where you can close your eyes and you can check in first just with your body here now. Your body sitting here, noticing any areas that maybe you're doing some kind of clenching or holding. So we can start with just saying yes to the present moment, allowing our breath to settle in whatever way our breath settles. And then I'd like for you to bring to mind something that you're struggling with. So it could be a problem that you're struggling with. It could be something within yourself or in a relationship, something that's up for you that you find yourself wanting to get rid of or fix. and let your mind sort of tell the story of it a little bit so you can get a little bit hooked. You can tell the story of why this is hard for you, why you don't like it, why you hate it, all those things that can get you hooked. You can even imagine this thing happening. Let yourself get hooked by it. And then drop the story for a moment once you've kind of got a good hook going. And I'd like for you just to make contact with what the residue is in your body. Like notice what it feels like in your body, this thing that you struggle with, the feelings that are there. And I'd like for you to imagine that you could turn towards wherever it is. Like, is it in certain parts of your body? Is it moving? Is it heavy? What if you could turn towards it and hold it like you would hold a baby? Really imagining yourself like opening your arms, picking it up, and holding it. Holding it softly and gently, like you would a crying baby, a screaming baby. And it may be really, really loud. And breathe. So just like you would hold a screaming baby, breathe while you hold this painful thing. And you can say, yes, I know. So then you can slowly keep kind of that imagery of holding that baby, and maybe even just the sensation of opening and allowing and saying yes in your body, keeping that contact with your body as you slowly bring your awareness back into the room. So we're not always going to close our eyes midday, but what we can do midday or in the middle of our day when painful stuff shows up is recognize that it's here. Like that's the first thing, like here it is. And pause and see where we're resisting against it. Where are we bracing? Where are we in a tug of war with it? And can we loosen up our grip a little bit and maybe turn towards, especially when turning towards what it is that's hurting you also is turning towards your values. So sometimes our values and our painful things in life are headed in the same direction. Okay. So Debbie's going to talk now about some other things that can be challenging our thoughts with cognitive diffusion.
Okay. Thank you. That was great. Okay. Stand by. One sec. Okay. Okay, cognitive diffusion, the third process. So as you probably have learned in your life by now, that sometimes our thoughts can trip us up a little. Diana mentioned that one of the things people come in often talking about certain things they want to get rid of when they come in for therapy. You know, I want to get rid of anxiety. I want to get rid of this or that. Often it's negative thoughts, self-critical thoughts, self-doubt thoughts, obsessive thoughts, that kind of thing. And you could probably think of some examples of your own life of thoughts that you've had that are not so helpful. Well, I'm going to go a little bit further into this exploration of the human mind that I was talking about earlier when I was talking about the wonders of the human mind, but also the dark side. So I'm going to use a little metaphor here. Most of us have probably who have been on an airplane, right? Which may have been a while for a lot of us in this current world we're living in. But has this ever happened to you? Maybe like a show of hands, if you've ever been looking forward to a flight because you can read your book, catch up on a little work, listen to music, take a nap, and you end up sitting next to someone, this has happened to me before, so my hand is up, who won't stop talking. The entire flight, they are, okay, I see a lot of hands in the air here. Okay, all right. Metaphorically, you know, the little Zoom hand and other hands. So what happens sometimes is that you sit next to this person who is just chatting away. Sometimes, you know, they might be kind of nice or they might be a little grumpy, you know, sort of complaining and moaning, you know, griping and moaning about things. Whatever the case is, they won't stop talking. And you're getting kind of annoyed by them, right? And you might even try to like give them a hint by pulling out your headphones or opening your book. You might try just arguing back with them. You might try to ignore them and distract yourself. You might order a glass of wine or a beer, but they will not stop talking. There's really nothing you can do. There's no empty seats. You can't move. You're just stuck with this nonstop commentary. Well, guess what? Our minds are kind of like that sometimes. Have you ever noticed? And for me, this tends to really happen, especially if I'm having any trouble sleeping at night in the middle of the night, or when I'm trying to go to bed and I'm still a little bit, you know, my mind's a little bit activated, is that I'll be like, okay, mind, can you please stop talking now? Can you please just hush up and be quiet? And just like that chatty seatmate on the airplane, my mind will not listen to that. It will not get the hint and it will not stop chatting away. So you can even notice this, like if you think about your mind right now, and actually, John, would you mind turning the chat back on? Hold on, I'm going to try to see if I can pull it up because I lost it on my screen. Is the chat up? Diana, can you nod if you see it?
The chat is up now.
Great. Okay, thanks, because I can't see it in this mode. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to just maybe share something in the chat that you've been a little distracted by, something that your mind's been up to. What's it even talking about like right now? What does your chatty seatmate have to say in this moment? Okay, there's the chat. I found it. Sorry, it was, okay. Some various messages that your minds are saying. Okay, thank you. We'll keep looking at that as we go. But this is the nature of the human mind. If you think about it, your mind is pretty much always there. Sometimes it's very loud and you really can't tune it out. Other times it's a little bit more in the background, but your mind just has this sort of running commentary. So before I talk about cognitive diffusion, I'm going to talk about the opposite of cognitive diffusion, which is fusion. And that's when we get really hooked, or in ACT, we call it fused, with unhelpful thoughts, that unhelpful commentary. And so I'm going to also ask you, even, you might still be doing the chat, that's okay, but grab your, your journal or your paper, or whatever you have handy, and pay attention. I'm going to go through a few examples of some unhelpful types of thoughts that we can often find ourselves getting fused with. And the question here is, what are some of the frequent flyers in your own mind, right? Some of those unhelpful thoughts that really tend to hook you. So sometimes self-criticism is a big one, right? Your mind is always kind of thinking about yourself a little bit. And sometimes people can get caught in thoughts about, well, I'm not good enough. I'm not competent. I don't think I can do this. I'm unattractive. I don't look good enough. My jeans don't fit anymore. Maybe we have thoughts about how other people will perceive us. I'm unlovable. Nobody likes me. People think I'm annoying. I'm lazy. I'm boring. I'm a slob. Whatever the case is, we can get into all kinds of self-criticism. Sometimes those kind of self-critical thoughts really can hook us, and we can start to believe them, right? In those moments of self-doubt, you might think those thoughts are true. We can also get caught up in comparisons. So an obvious one is that we compare ourselves to other people, the Joneses next door. We compare ourselves to all those people on social media that seem to have a really great life compared to us. We can compare ourselves actually to an ideal version of ourselves. The ideal version of myself gets up at 5 a.m., goes for a run, is super productive, is great mom to my kids. Well, sometimes I compared myself to that person and I don't feel so great about myself. We can also get fused with judgments and opinions about ourselves, of course, but also about the world around us and about other people. And how often do you form a judgment or an opinion about someone or something and start to latch onto it as if it's the truth? And we can even almost forget sometimes that it's actually an opinion, and that opinion might not be the whole story, but our mind will tell us that it is. If we latch onto it too strongly, we can get really hooked by that. It can lead to anger and frustration and all kinds of problems. We absolutely can get caught up in shoulds about all the things we should be doing. We can get caught up in rules for ourselves for how things should be going. And here's an especially unhelpful one in the context of relationships, is that we can become very convinced that we're right. We can get very caught up in the thought that we are right about things. And this can also lead to all kinds of problems, I think, in our relationships. If we are convinced that we are right, but other people disagree with us, and we get really latched onto that, it can be a really tough place to be. So some of those may ring a bell for you and maybe some of your frequent flyers. And of course, there's plenty of other ones as well. These are just a few examples. So this is fusion. When we get hooked by our thoughts. What is diffusion? Well, diffusion means unhooking from your thoughts. So noticing your mind. We've actually been doing that already. You probably didn't even really notice. You may not have known unless you're already, pretty familiar with ACT, that even in talking about the mind in this way, we're noticing our mind, and that is a form of diffusion. Seeing your thoughts for what they really are. They're just thoughts. They're not always facts. They're not the same thing as our direct experience. What we're doing when we're talking about diffusion is we're seeing our thoughts for what they are. We're seeing our mind for what it is. We're really stepping back and looking at our thoughts from a distance. It's this ability to observe our thoughts without being so hooked by them. We're also choosing which thoughts to pay attention to. So some of our thoughts can be very helpful, like the thought that told me I could sign up to teach this webinar today, that I have the ability to do that I can plan to be here, that kind of thing. But I also have some unhelpful thoughts. What if they all think I don't know what I'm talking about, etc. And those thoughts come up for me, and you can just say, okay, you know what, that's not a very helpful thought. I'm just gonna kind of pay more attention to the other kind of thoughts. And that's another key piece of diffusion, is not letting unhelpful thoughts run your life. Those thoughts that tell you, I'll do it tomorrow, I'm not good enough, I have to do things a certain way, the rules, the shoulds, but instead making a more values-driven choice. So not letting the unhelpful thoughts run your life. Okay, so this is great, right? Sounds good. So how do we do diffusion? How do we get there? Well, I'm going to actually start by telling you how not to diffuse. So often people, this is kind of the default in my opinion, and this is where a lot of people start with, is like, okay, I'm going to get rid of those unhelpful thoughts. I'm going to erase them from my mind. I'm going to challenge them. I'm going to replace them with something more positive. Well, unfortunately, minds do not like that. Minds do not like to be controlled. And I'm going to actually read you an excerpt from our book. This is a personal story, true story from my own life about my attempts to control my thoughts about a baked potato. Okay. A few years back, I briefly and unsuccessfully tried eating fewer carbohydrates. One day at lunch, I saw a baked potato in the cafeteria, and I told myself, I can't eat that potato, it has carbs. Well, guess what happened? I spent the rest of the day obsessing about the baked potato, and this is key, telling myself to stop thinking about it. The more I told myself to stop thinking about it, the more I couldn't help it. Every minute or so, I pictured that potato. if I had just allowed myself to think freely about that boring old baked potato, perhaps it wouldn't have turned into something so big in my head that day. So even something like a little thought, like a, baked potato popping to mind, the more we struggle with it, it backfires, right? So if you have one of those kind of frequent flyer thoughts that really hooks you, and you tell yourself, I'm just going to stop thinking about that, often what happens is that we might even be able to do it for a little while, but it'll just keep showing up again and again and again, because again, minds do not like to be controlled. And you could think maybe just for a moment about the times that you've tried to do that, tried to get rid of certain thoughts or not think of them or distract themselves. Did that work? Probably not in the long run. So we're going to try a little diffusion practice here. This is another fun, kind of simple exercise. There's a lot of different ways that you can practice diffusion. And one of the things that is really that you can do with diffusion is to have a little bit of fun with your thoughts, because sometimes those thoughts feel really painful, right? If you're having a thought like, I'm not good enough, I'm lazy, you can really beat yourself up over that, and it can be really painful. But if you can kind of get a little bit of lightheartedness around that thought, it can actually kind of just help loosen you up a little bit. Okay, so step one, pick a frequent flyer thought. It might be one that you wrote down if you've been jotting down your thoughts. It could be any kind of self-judgment that you think of. It doesn't have to be like a negative one necessarily. It could even be a positive one. Like one that I write about in the book is, I have this story that I'm friendly. That's a pretty positive thing, I would say, but sometimes that actually can be a little bit of a trap for me if I'm too latched onto that. So whatever thought you want to think of, just come up with one example, okay? Step two, actually, John, is the chat still on, John? We're gonna need the chat again.
It is back on now.
Okay, so step two, get the chat going. Uh-oh, hold on, I lost my presentation again here. Sorry. Okay. Take a word or a sentence and use your pinky fingers. We're just going to play around with this, have a little fun, and type a word, a sentence, a self-judgment that shows up for you in the chat with your pinky finger. Not good enough, too boring, I'm an imposter. Oh, so many good ones. I'm crap. Yep. I should be doing more. I don't know enough. I'm so fat. I will never improve. I'm unlovable. And what did you notice? So step three here. So those are, again, some of those thoughts, if you're just really hooked into those thoughts, they feel painful. Even reading them, I'm like, oh, I feel like some empathy in reading those. But what did you notice? And you could type this in the chat as well. Like what happens when you get a little bit playful with it, when you kind of just try doing it in this new way, and actually not just when you type it with your pinkies, but also when you see other people's. How does that shift something? Does that shift something when you try this kind of different approach to your thoughts? Some people were smiling, got a little lighter, felt validating. Actually, I think sometimes it's really validating to know we're not the only ones who think in this way. Smile with my heart. Oh, I imagine a T-Rex typing with those little hands. I like that. I kind of want to use that. Made me laugh a little. Felt awkward, slowed me down, felt fun. Yeah. So yeah, so again, there's a lot of different techniques you can do to diffuse, even just writing it down sometimes. I don't know if anyone noticed this when you were jotting down your frequent flyer thoughts, but sometimes even the mere act of writing it down and getting a little space from it, seeing it right there as like scratch marks on a page can be helpful. So that is cognitive diffusion, and thank you all for participating in that exercise. Bet you didn't expect to be typing with your pinkies when you came here today. And so now we're going to move into our fourth process, and Diana is going to walk us through the process of perspective taking. Let me toss it over to you, Diana.
Thank you, Debbie. And there was some sound issues with me earlier, so let us know if it sounds any better or if it still sounds like you can't hear me. It would be good to know. But uh, it's Debbie shared a really great story of the baked potato. And one of the things about working together in this book is that we told a lot of stories. Oh, good, the sound is good. We told a lot of stories back and forth about these processes of ACT in our daily life. And there's some stories that didn't make the cut. So there was two really good stories that, because you're at this webinar, you're going to get to hear one of them that didn't make it. And they were both about eggs. And Debbie's was about an egg sandwich that landed in her lap. And mine was about actually more of a painful story, which was when I was in high school. I struggled a lot, and I actually struggled with an eating disorder for much of my high school years. And it's one of the reasons why I went on to be a therapist. And there was a moment when I was in high school when I was struggling really, really, really badly with anorexia. And I was in a family therapy session, which is already being in a family therapy session is painful, but being in a family therapy session when you're experiencing something like I was experiencing was pretty painful. And as I remember it, and I actually have a story about this story, is that the therapist at one point said to my sister, "Every family has a bad egg." And I swear I remember her looking at me. And to be honest, I actually really took that on. Like I was the bad egg. I was the problem that was causing a lot of problems in my family. And also later on in life, it was the story that I had about myself anytime anything went wrong. So if I was in a relationship and the relationship didn't go well, it was because I was the bad egg. Or when I had a hard time making friends in college, it was because I was a bad egg. And even it crops up now. Like sometimes I'm in group situations or on teams, and I feel that bad egg story kind of rear its ugly head, right? And this is the nature of the human mind, which is our human mind creates stories. We are storytellers. It's how we communicate. It's also a shorthand way of communicating. It creates mental models of things, right? I'm actually interviewing some neuromarketers next week for the podcast, and they talk all about branding and how our brain creates brands. And in some ways, these self stories are the brands that we give ourselves. And for me, with that bad egg story, what it did was really limit my experience. And we probably have all of you have examples of self stories that you have had about yourself. Maybe they're ones that started early on, like mine, that you kind of stuck around. And when you're boxed in by these self stories, you really miss out on what's happening in the present moment because the story just sort of clouds your whole experience, right? You ignore other contextual factors. Like, in that moment in the therapy room, whether she said I was a bad egg or not, I had a lot going on that probably contributed to me being a little bratty. I was probably hungry. I was struggling with high school, struggling with making friends. And it resulted in certain types of behavior, right? We also end up being inflexible in how we respond to the world. So maybe you have a story that I'm bad at math, and therefore you never pursue anything that has anything related to math in it, right? Because you have that self story that you developed, early on. We also have this confirmation bias situation where we look out and we find evidence to support our stories about ourselves or stories about other people. Certainly during the election and in this past year, we've seen that. Like, we seek evidence to support the stories that we have. And the other thing about self stories is they really interfere with our ability not only to take, when we can't take perspective on ourselves, we have a hard time taking perspective on others and being able to do this sort of shift of I'm wondering what it's like to be them. I'm wondering what are the contextual things that are influencing their behavior, right? It interferes with our ability to have empathy and really to connect with people when we're caught up in our self stories, so that they can become self-fulfilling prophecies, right? So maybe in high school, at a high school dance, you felt like you couldn't dance, or that you were bad at dancing, and so you just never got on that dance floor. And then you continue to do that every wedding that shows up. You're like the one in the corner, right? And then all of a sudden it's time for you to have your wedding or an event where you want to dance it, but you're like, I'm bad at dancing. And you probably haven't practiced a whole lot of dancing in your life. So maybe you are bad at dancing at this point, right? So our self stories can actually create the very lives that we're wanting to, that we don't like. And then ultimately they disconnect us from a greater whole. As humans, we crave not only feeling like we belong, so we create self stories in part to belong to something, but the irony is that they can prevent us from feeling like we belong. So as I was sharing my story, I imagine you have one or two or three. And the way that you can point out whether this is a story, and in particular an inflexible self story, is when it starts with these words like I never, I always, I don't, I can't. Or it starts with I am and I am not. So I am anxious, or I am friendly, as Debbie said, or I am smart. You know, some of the research on kids now is like, don't tell your kids they're smart. It's not going to help out in the long run in terms of having a growth mindset, right? What we want to do is tell them, sort of paying attention to what they're doing, not linking them to some kind of label. So I'd like for you to think about an I am story for yourself and an I am not story. And it really doesn't matter if they're positive or negative, because positive ones can get in the way just as much as negative ones. So write down an I am story, and it really helps for you to write this exercise down, like physically write out I am blank, and write out I am not blank. Okay. And then I want you to imagine like these self stories. The I am story is in one hand, and the I am not story is in the other hand. And then do this with me, because I'm doing it, so I hope you do it too. Hold those two stories up to your eyes. Do it with me, Debbie. Thank you. And then look around your room and notice what just happened, right? It really limits your view so that you can only see your life through those stories. Okay. Now put your hands down, and we're going to do something with these stories to see if we can get a little bit of wiggle room with them. Very simple. At the end of your story, I want you to write the word sometimes. Sometimes. Sometimes you are this. Sometimes I am a bad egg. You can ask my partner. Sometimes I'm not, right? So sometimes. Read your sentence with the I am sometimes. It's contextual. It depends. I am sometimes. And just like we had our stories up here, so bring your goggles, your binoculars back up. Doing this kind of sometimes work of I am sometimes is like doing this. Pull your hands away from your face. So now you can see sometimes I am this, sometimes I am that, but not always. I have more room to like look around what's around me. I have more perspective, right, on my story. But we're going to do a third thing, which is the third kind of component of perspective taking, which is I want you to take your pen and just circle I am. I am. You are more than the stories that your mind creates about you. And the experience of that would be taking your two hands and then just letting them drop at your lap and recognize that there's a whole space around you. There's even stuff behind you, and there's stuff to the side of you. There's a whole periphery of your sense. You are part of something bigger than this story that you've developed about yourself over the years. And now, without being so caught up in the story, you hopefully can move a little bit more freely in your life. So, what does that look like daily? And what it looks like daily is starting to notice when you get narrowed, when you feel it, like you can feel your story coming on. Sometimes you can feel it in a conversation with another where you're trying to prove your point so much you don't even hear what the other person is saying. That happens to me a lot. When I get my threat system going in a conversation, all of a sudden I'm just thinking about what's the next thing I'm going to say instead of recognizing there's another person here with a different perspective. We can get more flexible with our stories by, sort of like if you've always thought of yourself as, friendly, then be not so friendly every once in a while. Try it out, see how it goes for you. And seeing, just sort of being more playful with these stories that, especially as adults, I find that the older we get, the more inflexible we get, at least for me with my stories. And it's really, really helpful to just step outside of those boxes every once in a while. We can also practice seeing our story with more compassionate eyes. And even for me, just telling that story about myself as a bad egg, wow, I have such compassion for myself as a child, as a young adult, navigating the world, having developed this. So we can develop that sense of compassion, especially for the stories that are more painful for us. And then we can do this third thing that Debbie and I talked about in the book, which is stepping into what's called a more transcendent self. And a more transcendent self is sort of like, if you can imagine, there's a big blue sky, as there are in Colorado. And both Debbie and I lived in Colorado during graduate school, and Debbie lives there now. And what's so cool about Colorado is these skies. We would pull over on the side of the road sometimes just to watch these skies. But imagine a big blue sky, and then an afternoon thunderstorm is coming in. No matter how bad that thunderstorm gets. So if you can think about your own emotions and having a thunderstorm of experience in your body, no matter how bad it gets, it never can harm the sky. So your transcendent self is a lot like that. There's a version of you that is unaffected by it all and also connected to it all. And Steve Hayes does a really wonderful job, just a plug to Liberated Mind, one of my favorite books of all time, of talking about this transcendent self. But I'd like for us to practice it a little bit. And this is a really good time for an eye break and a movement break. So first, what I'd like you to do is just to get up and make it so that you can still hear me, but you're in a different part of the room, doing something different with your body. So this would be a good time to put your legs up the wall, or if you want to lie down on the ground. If you even want to put your earbuds in and take a little walk during this exercise, you could do it during that. If you want to stretch, you can do it during that. But I want to see you getting up and getting away from your screen, including you, Debbie. Awesome. She loves it. Okay. So give yourself an eye break and a movement break, maybe stretch and move a little bit before we do this exercise. And it's just going to be just a couple of minutes here. All right, so landing somewhere, wherever you are, I want you to just to take a minute to land here. So here you are at this point in time in this part of your room, at this point in the day of wherever it is, or night, wherever you are, and imagining that you're landing on a timeline. And this timeline stretches all the way to the left of you. And to the left of you, it goes all the way back to when you began. And for many of us, we began way before, even before we began, like with our ancestors, right? So just imagining that timeline going on forever to the left. And then to the right of you, the timeline continues on into the future, all the way off into the future. And here you are standing and sitting or lying at you here now on the timeline of your life. I want you to imagine that you could get up and walk down the timeline to the left towards your younger self and find a younger version of you when that story started for you. Or if you can't find where it started, where it was most painful for you in your life. And I want you to imagine sitting down next to that younger version of you that had that story, that thing, that painful thing they believed to be true about them. And as you sit down next to them, imagine that you could look at them and they could look at you and you could give them a look of, I know. Because only you really know what it's like to be them. So go ahead and look at them. Give them acknowledgement of you know what it's like to be them. You could even put your hand on their cheek or your hand on their chest or your hand on their hand and just say, hey, I know. And breathe. And then I'd like for you to tell them something that only you know about where you are now in your life that would be a nice piece of an offering for them. Just give them an offering from their older, wiser self. And once you've given them a little bit of an offering, grab their hand and have them walk back with you to the here and now and sit them down right there on your left. And then I'd like for you to go off into the future to your right. And moving into the future of the right, you see that there's an older version of you. But this time, the older version of you sees that there's things that you struggle with right now. Things that are incredibly hard for you, painful for you, that you can't see quite clearly on. Allow that older version of you to put their hand on your cheek or your heart and say to you, I know, because they are really the only ones that know what it's like to be you and how hard it is. And maybe even take in some advice from this older, wiser you. What would they tell you? And breathe. And then I'd like for you to grab hold of the hand of the older version of you and walk them back to the present moment and sit down in your spot right here in the timeline of your life with the younger version of you on the left and the older version of you on the right, and you sitting in the here and the now. And you can slowly open up your eyes. And if you'd like, you can come back to our space again. And maybe just as we're kind of regathering, John, if you could open that chat again, I'd love to just people to write in the chat, what were some of the things that you told your younger self, or some of the things that your older self told you? So share some of your wisdom in the chat of what your older self told you or what you told your younger self. And we're going to be moving from perspective taking with Debbie to values.
We've talked several times so far. We've mentioned several times already that in ACT, our goal isn't to reduce symptoms. It isn't to get rid of emotions or thoughts, right? So that's not what ACT is about. Ultimately, what ACT is really truly about is about freeing people up to have the most meaningful life they can and to connect with their values and to live their lives in a way that is consistent with their values over time, even as thoughts and emotions show up of different kinds throughout your life. So our process, our fifth process, is values. And what ACT is really about is helping people live their values. And so the question that I'm going to pose for this section is, what is most meaningful to you? You know, when it all is said and done, what would you really like for your life to stand for in the time that you have left? And to me, it all kind of boils down to this, really. You know, we've kind of alluded to values throughout the talk. And when I do ACT work, this is kind of what it all boils down to. So what do we mean by values? We keep using that word, but let's break it down a little bit. So for one thing, values are a direction that you can head. So they're meant to be sort of a guide to what's important to you, that kind of help you know. And actually, I don't know about the other ACT therapists that are here today, because I know there are some, but to me, it's actually pretty important to think about that pretty early on. But it's also just a really important thing to keep in mind as you go through your life is, what's the direction that I want to be heading in my life? What matters to me? Values are about meaning, and they're not necessarily about comfort or happiness. And in fact, there's a pretty big distinction there, and it's an important one, right? This is not a therapy that's about trying to be happy, trying to replace your unpleasant feelings with pleasant ones. And there's a saying that is often, you often hear in the ACT world, which is that you hurt where you care, and you care where you hurt. Diana was talking about this earlier when she was talking about acceptance, that often actually, if you take a look at the areas that you care most about and you look really closely, there's some discomfort there. There's some risk, there's some pain, there's some potential for loss. There's something that shows up. And also you care where you hurt. So if you're noticing that there's something that you're feeling upset or angry or sad about, if you take a look at why you're having this reaction, why do you care? It's usually because there's something there that's important to you, right? If it wasn't important to you, it would be like, man, who cares? I'm not anxious. I'm not sad about this. It doesn't matter to me, because there's plenty of things probably in your life that you actually don't care about. But when you do care, there's something there. There's some sort of meaning, significance tied to it. Another way of putting this, and this is from a book that's written by the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu: nothing beautiful comes without some suffering. Values are also ongoing. They're not about an outcome, right? It's not the same thing as a goal. It's not like you ever get there. It's another metaphor for it would be, they say it's about the journey, not the destination. Like if you're going for a hike and someone could just pick you up and plop you at the end of the trail, it's like, okay, it always feels good to get to the end of the trail, but you would miss the whole experience of hiking, which is kind of the whole point. And values are really more about engaging in the process over time. And if you think about a quality that matters to you, like I care about kindness, that's never something you can check off your list. Like, okay, I was kind, I'm done. It doesn't work like that. It's just this ongoing process. Values are also deeply personal and chosen by you. So values they sort of come from within, and they're not really something that is imposed on you. Sometimes it gets a little muddy, actually, because we've been trained that certain things should be important to us, but really ultimately it's up to us to choose what we really care about. And I'm going to play another one of those audio clips, and this is from Dr. Jenna Lejeune from our podcast, and she did an episode with us on values. She has a book about values.
The thing I'm interested in is not what is the meaning of life. I'm interested in helping people explore what is a meaningful life for you. And those are very different questions, right? One is about finding some truth that exists out there. There is a meaning of life. And the other is a looking inward and a choosing process. What for me would create a meaningful life? What would I choose that to be? And then, by definition, you living out your values is the meaningful life.
So that's the question, right? What is a meaningful life for you? And sometimes it takes, in my experience, it takes a little bit of soul searching sometimes to uncover that, if people have really lost contact. So for you yourself, if you're like, I don't really know, that's not an uncommon experience to have. Sometimes you have to really sit with yourself to know, what is it? Values are also intrinsically rewarding. So values are not about gold stars, pleasing other people. Values are, we do them because we care about them, because it matters to us. So there's this sort of inward sense of reinforcement. They also often require some vulnerability, because I think that sometimes when we really and truly engage in the things that matter to us, it does feel a little bit vulnerable, scary, risky. There's potential for loss there. When we put our heart into something, sometimes it does feel hard. And so they sometimes require us to step outside of our comfort zone a little bit and do hard things. And this is an important one. And this one sometimes I think is a little bit confusing to people. So values are qualities. They're qualities of being. It's not the same thing as like a domain. So by a domain, what we mean is the areas of life that we care about. Those are important too. But what the question I would ask is like, how do you want to engage in that important area to you? And so let me just show you what I mean by this. So on this slide, on the left-hand side, we have some domains, and these are domains that I often hear about when I do values work with people. So family, friendship, relationships, work, education, health, community, social causes. These are domains. So these are areas of our lives where values might show up, some more than others, maybe for certain people. But the qualities of action, so these are the kind of words that you would use to describe your best self. These are the kinds of ways that you want to be. So for instance, if someone said to me, well, I value, being a good partner to my spouse. I value my marriage. I would break that down. I would say, well, what is a good partner to you? What feels meaningful about that? When you're at your best, what does that look like for you? Can you give me some words to describe it? And so, you could think about, and you could imagine that might be different from one person to the next, right? Like one person might care about being fun and lighthearted and engaged, and another person might care about deep, heartfelt conversation and connection with the person. And so they both of these two people care about their relationship, but the way that they live their values might look a little bit different. So you can actually kind of just take a moment. We're going to do an exercise in a second, but to just think about some of the domains here that you care about. And then also just some of the words that come to mind, like when it's all said and done, if someone was going to describe you and what you were like in your life and what your life stood for, what would be some of the words that you would really want to hear? And finally, values are actions that we can take. So we live our values by putting them into action every day. And as Diana said earlier, sometimes we feel like we're waiting for the right circumstance. I'm waiting till I'm less busy. That's one I do a lot. Like, as soon as I'm not so busy. Well, guess what? That never happens. That checklist never seems to get all the way finished before I add 10 more things to it. So that actions you can take now, if you have 2 days left to live, you can still do something in the direction of your values. If you really break it down into something small, you could probably do something today that is in line with your values. I think it's important to acknowledge that values are not about being perfect at this all the time. No, literally, I can't think of a single person who is always 100% living their values every minute of the day. We all get off track sometimes. And I think just like this person that you see on this slide who's hiking down the trail, if you're hiking along in your life and you just get a little bit off the trail, you just kind of reorient yourself back to that direction that you're trying to head, that get yourself kind of get out your compass and kind of reorient yourself a little bit. So we all get off track sometimes. And it's really, again, it's this process of adjusting course as needed. And I think you can pay attention actually to some of your inner cues to be a signal that you might be off track. If you're finding that you have a sense of longing or regret, loss, jealousy or envy, or just the pain of missing out on something, that's an indicator that, I'm a little bit sidetracked. I might need to reorient myself. If you are on track, often, there can be discomfort that shows up, but you can also often notice a real feeling of vitality, this sort of inner sense that things are really resonating. like, oh yeah, I care about this. This matters to me. I'm on track. And so I'm going to just ask you to do another brief writing assignment. In fact, we said 3 minutes. Diana, do you think we could do 3 minutes, or should we? Okay, 3 minutes. So what I'm going to have you do is get out your journal or your, Word document or whatever you're using. And I'm going to actually time us here. And I want you to just write about a domain. So kind of think back through that list, or just some area of your life where you'd like to put a little bit more of your heart and soul. Just something that you care about. And I'm going to start the timer and just start writing. Don't stop. Write about your values in that area. Writing about some of the qualities, the words that come to mind that you would like to describe you at your best in that area. You might write about whether you get sidetracked, if you have been sidetracked, what happened, how might you act more consistently with your values in that area. And perhaps, if it makes sense to do so, set a little intention. What might you do today, this week? What's one values directed action that you could take in your life, big or small? And it's been 3 minutes, so just bring that to a close. And if you're not finished, I really would invite you and encourage you to continue this on your own, because, again, sometimes I think it's just a matter of doing a little soul searching and just kind of exploration. Oops, I closed my screen too soon. Diana, I'll just go ahead and punt the ball over to you. I stopped 2 slides too early to talk about our next process.
Up in the values exercise. I forgot to get myself ready here. Thank you, Debbie. That was really nice. And I don't know if others, as they were doing some of these more powerful exercises, just a lot of emotions can come up, and just sort of welcoming those feelings that show up when we're writing about our values, and how sometimes we can make contact with some of the pain there too when we're talking about something that we care about. So just noticing that. I was noticing that for myself. And the next process is our last process, which is about committed action. And it comes so nicely after Debbie's values exercise there, because as she mentioned, like, what's your intention? And then how do we take committed action, how do we use the science of psychology to actually make these things come to fruition in our lives, that we live that lives that are aligned with our values? So committed action, when I think about it, one of the things that recently I experienced was watching someone jump off a cliff. So I live in this canyon here in Santa Barbara, and there's this big mountain right behind us. It's a really popular place for people to jump, paraglide, and they come and they land really fairly close to my home. So I often see them coming across my sky. But I got a chance to watch them jump, and sometimes it feels like that when we're taking committed action in our lives, even though on the outside, some people may not notice it, but on the inside, it feels like taking committed action because we're stepping into something that may feel impossible or that feels really scary or uncomfortable. The vulnerability of committed action towards your values often includes discomfort. So I'm going to show you this video of a woman jumping off this cliff to show what it feels like. And then we'll do another one to look at what it actually looks like and how to use the behavioral science. So you'll notice that when she's jumping, she actually has to turn around a little bit and it pulls her back. So that's often the case with committed action. And then she's just got to go for it. She's got to run. You got this! Woo! And then there's this moment of like, I did it. And this freedom of life opening up when you move towards something you really care about. It's uncomfortable, but then it's also liberating. Like, whoa, I applied for that job, or I, ended that relationship that was so painful for me. And it's, gosh, that divorce is really painful. And it's also freeing me up in certain ways, right? So that's what committed action feels like on the inside. It doesn't always look like that on the outside. And really, when we look at what makes up committed action, I love these three components that DJ Moran, who is also on our show, talks about. It's about taking action, so not just thinking about it, but actually doing it. Like, what are you doing with your hands and your feet here? And then connecting to your values. That's what's driving it. Those values that you just wrote about, and you can feel how deep and big they are inside of you, and they can be incredibly powerful in helping us take committed action, like jumping off a cliff. Even in the face of obstacles. So even when stuff shows up, those pesky thoughts that we talked about earlier, those difficult emotions that we explored, even when those show up, sometimes it's tiny. We make moves in the direction of our values. So the tiny part is important. And I want to share another video of this is more of what I think it looks like when we're taking committed action. And this is a video of my chicken, Chicky, who's my oldest chicken. She's like 6 years old, maybe older. And every day she gets up on her roost to go to sleep. But every night she gets up on her roost, and every day she has to get back down again, which is not so easy for her. But it's connected to her values, I think. What if chickens have values? To get down. So here's some committed action of Chicky, and you can see her friend does it easily.
You can do it.
But for her, it's a little tougher. It takes some courage.
Got it. Oh, small steps.
Thinking about it.
Woo, you're free.
And off she goes, and she gets to go out and have worms and some grass if it's rained in Santa Barbara, and it's worth it, right? So our committed actions can be tiny, tiny, tiny things, again, that maybe no one would notice, but that build over time to point you in the direction of what matters to you. And what's cool about values and how Debbie shared that they're intrinsically motivating is that means, as opposed to extrinsic motivators, like you're such a good girl or you got a good grade, they're inside of you, and you can dig down deep and draw upon them when you are spent and your motivation is low. So they can actually energize you. And I really believe that sort of some of the real positive changes that we've seen, like over the course of the summer, there are the amazing, powerful changes and movements that we've seen against like anti-racism when people had zero energy left to give. Zero, nothing. And especially people of color, right? So here we're seeing motivation that comes from deep inside, and it sustains us. It is also important to focus on action over outcome. right? All I got to do is get from this perch to that perch, and then I'll get from this perch to the floor. And that is really helpful in focusing our attention to what we are doing as opposed to some endpoint that we're getting to, especially with something like a health behavior change. You see that a lot where people are thinking that they need to get like something like people's focus on weight loss instead of focusing on taking care of their bodies and what actions they're going to do to help take care of their bodies, right? What happens on the day that your jeans don't fit, or the day that your scale doesn't change? Do you give up on your committed action of taking care of your body? No, right? So that's where tapping into values is really important, and making these small daily moves. And then as act as a behavioral psychology, it's really built from both behaviorism as well as these cool like Eastern principles and philosophies, right? But as a behavioral science, we can draw upon what we know about the behavior of how to change a behavior, and that every behavior, and this is sort of the basics of behaviorism, occurs, or a lot of behaviors that are reinforced occur because there's been a cue. So for little Chicky, it's I'm opening up the door in the morning, right, to tell her to take action. And then she engages in the behavior of jumping down, and then she runs out and she gets a consequence, which is worms and freedom, right? And so when I come in the door again, she's going to get ready to go, right? So our behaviors that get reinforced over the time can become the habits. And when you orient your behaviors towards habits that matter to you, then all of a sudden you start building a life that is rich and meaningful. A lot of us are stuck in daily habits just because we got stuck in them. It's not our fault. Humans do this, but we're stuck in daily habits that don't really build us a rich and meaningful life, right? It's okay to have some of those, but it's also thinking about your values and what you want to grow, that you could break them down into really small things. So for example, one of the things that I really value is taking care of my body over time. I have some back issues and other issues related to my body that causes a lot of pain, but I also just want to be able to move through my life as long as I can in my body to the best of taking care of it. So one of the habit loops that I've created for myself is there's a cue, which I do pretty much every morning, which is putting on my socks or putting on my shoes, or getting ready for the day, putting on my clothes. And when it's time to put my clothes on or my shoes for the day, I do it one foot at a time and I balance. And by balancing, I engage in that values rich action of taking care of my balance, practicing my balance, which we all know is really important as we age. And it's intrinsically rewarding, right? Here's another one. Something else that I am constantly caught up in is my phone. And I know a lot of us are. And I really, really want and value eye contact with my children, and for them to know that their mom sees them and hears them and is present with them. So a values rich tiny habit would be when I'm holding my phone and I see my kid's face, I put my phone down and look them in the eyes. And when I do that, I'm engaging in this intrinsically valued, experience of connecting. And that builds over time, as well as modeling a behavior that I hope that when they are teenagers, they put down their phone and look at me. Chances are slim, but at least I'm trying to model it now. So I'd like for you to go back to what you just did. You just did a values exercise. It was like big and important and meaningful, of like these values you care about. But maybe you could pull out that value and ask yourself, like, what would be a behavior that I could engage in, a values rich action, on a pretty regular basis? And how would I know, like, what would be the cue to engage in that behavior? Something small. So you'd write down the cue. When this happens, I do this. This is the action that I do. And then you'd write down the reward. And you could even write it as a little loop like this. Like, here's my cue. This is what cues me to do it. Here's what I do. Small, make it tiny, tiny, tiny. And then reward. Why is this rewarding to me? Take a moment to see if you can write down one for you that's small. And if you can't think of one right now, you could just also write down this loop so that you could think about it and spend a little time on it. This is the kind of thing that in a therapy session we'd be spending a lot of time on. So, but take a moment to see what you can come up with And John, if you could open the chat again, I wouldn't mind if anyone wants to share theirs in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. That makes it even more committed action when you share it with another person. I think I shared that sock shoe thing on a really early podcast with Debbie. And I've been doing it ever since because I feel this obligation to keep the habit going ever since I shared it. Like you all are going to find out that I'm not doing it every time I sit down. Oh, no, stand up. Put your socks on one at a time.
Social support helps with behavior change, because if it's just in your head, you might not do it. But if you share it with other people, then you are more likely to. Yeah.
Yes. Having a team to support you in your behavior change is incredibly helpful. So go ahead. If you've come up with yours, write it in the chat. Oh, I value my marriage, and so I will give my husband a kiss when I get out of bed and before I go to bed. That is a good one, and often one that we don't do. Feeling overwhelmed, meditate and feeling calm. Move at least once per day. Value continuous learning. So you're here acting on your value right now. All right, Alan. When a session is done, do a quick exercise. Yes, we'll feel better. Absolutely. Is the cue supposed to be something we cultivate or something that's automatically happens? Awesome. It's even better if it's just a cue that happens in your life. So if it's like you make coffee every morning and that's the time when you lean against the counter to do like a mini down dog, right? While you're waiting for your coffee, that would be an example. So it's helpful to have cues that are already. BJ Fogg, who wrote a lot on this idea of tiny habits, talks about every time he went to the bathroom, he would do a push-up, right? So having some cues that are linked to your daily living is helpful. We have a lot of natural cues. And in the book, Debbie talked about this concept, and I talk about this concept of like pancaking your habits, where you're building them on top of each other's. When I'm done with work, I will make time to play with my dog, who's been laying and waiting patiently for me to be done. And that's rewarding for both of you, right? To have that exchange of taking care of your dog. And then I'm sure it gets reinforced back from how your dog just enjoys being with you. When I put hand cream on, nice. I do a quick mindfulness exercise and treat myself to a hand massage. That's such a good one. Some of these really small little things that we're doing in our days that we don't even pay attention to, but we're doing it every day. And that's such a sweet self-care of just putting on hand cream and taking a moment with your hands, right? Our hands do so much for us. We ask so much of them. It's nice to spend some time.
Don't you wish there was a like button on the chat? Because there's so many great ones. I love reading these.
I love reading them. And this chat has been so cool to read throughout this whole time. So I love all of your daily values rich habits that you can take away from here and keep on building on them. And when we think about like these types of habits or committed action, one way we can think about it is sort of how you want to use your energy in the world, right? Sort of like energy exchange, right? And when you put your energy towards things that matter to you, it feeds back. It becomes this sort of positive feedback loop, right? It's not always easy, but it does feed back. And we've been sharing some of these audio clips of the podcast throughout this whole webinar, but there's one that I want to share that was really impactful to me. And this is from Helen Neville of the Psychology of Radical Healing Collective, talking about how she wants to spend her energy. And I think it's a really beautiful clip.
When I think about how I want to spend my energies, I'm like, does this align with my values of liberation? Is this working toward liberation, particularly of Black folks, Indigenous folks, and people of color?
Yeah. So committed action, is this working towards what I value? And it can be that simple of a question. Is this working towards what I value? And what is it that I value in this moment? So here we are. Whoop, go on back. Here we are back to our Hexaflex. And I just want to do a shout out to my mama, who illustrated every single chapter of our book that Debbie and I worked on, and not one of her illustrations got in. So here's another illustration of hers. And I'm going to use it.
Because of publishing, it was.
It wasn't because they didn't like them. It was because of just publishing constraints that we learned all sorts of things.
That's right. I just
like
wanted
a lot of words. Yeah, a lot of words didn't get in either. A lot of exercises. But like Debbie's egg story that was so good. But when we think about these 6 core processes, we can start to think of them as working together. And you'll kind of notice that as we were talking about committed action, we couldn't help but talk about values. And as we're talking about being present, we can't help but talk about acceptance, right? They all fit together. And as Steve Hayes said in the beginning, like sides of a box, right? And eventually they kind of work together like a hive, like a humming hive of bees, that they have different jobs to some degree, but together they're working together as one, which ultimately is your psychological flexibility. And if you go back to that very first slide where I said, just remember one thing, or earlier on, that it really boils down to accepting, caring, and taking a step. Debbie, you want to take it? You there, Debbie?
Sure, you can keep the slide up if you want to do it though. So we just wanted to end by sharing a few resources and of course, thanking everyone. Just that's our book. So we've been mentioning it, ACT Daily Journal. It's just hot off the presses, coming out this week. Our podcast, again, is Psychologists Off the Clock, and we talk a lot about ACT on the podcast and compassion and behavior change, and we interview some really wonderful, amazing people. Especially if you're a mental health professional, if you're not already familiar with ACBS is the organization for ACT, and their website, contextualscience.org, has some wonderful resources, all kinds of articles, books, exercises, just, additional trainings that you can find there. So check that out.
And if you're looking for a therapist and you want an ACT therapist, there's a Find a Therapist search button there. So that would also be a great place if you're interested in a therapist that practices this.
Oh, yes. Thank you. I forgot about that. Yes. Great resource for everyone. Diana, you already mentioned a shout out to the book, A Liberated Mind by Stephen Hayes is a great one on acceptance and commitment therapy. Diana, do you take this one?
Okay, so good news, folks. New Harbinger is giving us 25% off to all the people that attended this webinar. So exciting. So write this down, actdailyjournal.info/praxis. And if you go to that, you'll be able to get that 25% off discount. And then you're also going to get a planner that Debbie and I made up that is really a great way sorry, I got distracted by the chat. A planner that's a really great way to organize your day around these ACT principles. And then you're also going to get some slides from this workshop that are select slides and more. So sign up there. Debbie, do you want to? Oh, here's the planner. Go ahead, Debbie.
This is what part of what the planner looks like. You can print it out and use it. Actually, someone put in the chat, there's 2 liberated minds. Which one is correct? That's because there's a fake one. So you have to make sure you get the legit Liberated Mind by Steve Hayes, because someone, I guess this happens. If you look at Amazon, people write like fakes and they won't take them down. So just make sure you're getting the legit one by Stephen Hayes.
There's a question about the 25% off discount, if that's for international folks too. I'm not so sure on that, but go to New Harbinger and see, because it might just be through, I don't know. So go check it out.
That's a great question. We should know that.
I hope it is.
Sorry that we don't know the answer to that. Yeah, we'll find out.
And then we have lots of offerings through our email lists and blogs. Both Debbie and I blog pretty regularly. And also we offer, Debbie and I kind of split the scene here. She's more on Facebook and I'm more on Instagram. And so together we cover the social media. But it's a way for us to stay connected. So when these are my bees from my beehive, and when they get to difficult spots, they link arms and legs. It's called festooning. So they festoon to reach the difficult spots. So I hope that we can stay connected and continue to support each other in this ACT community. You're part of the ACT community from being here, and let's festoon. Let's keep the conversation going. Debbie, you want to say?
I will just add, thank you all. Let me just say a couple things. One is the Facebook group is going to be, it's up and running. So if you want to join that, it's a great place to stay connected. I know Diana has a really active, there's all kinds of resources on your webpage, Diana, and your Instagram. So check those out. I just did a blog post this morning on assertive communication with a cheat sheet that you can check out. So a lot of great resources, but mostly just wanted to thank everyone for giving us 2 hours of your time. I know people are busy. Some people are up in the middle of the night in different parts of the world. So it just means a lot to me that you're all here, and thank you so much for participating.
Yeah, I want to say the same thing. It's sort of, it's just really humbling to see that people are here and that we're all together in this one space from all over the world, and that we're all going to go out, sort of our little individual bees, part of this hive, but just out to do some good work in the world of living our values. And that's really my wish for all of you, and my wish for you too, Debbie, and my wish for myself and all of us on this planet, that we can live a more values-based way. Yeah, thank you to everybody. So good to hear all of your thoughts in the chat as well.